Mentioned in the last hour Harry Truman as the guy who was the first Democrat to actually propose legislation that was what today we would call Medicare-for-all. Back then it was referred to as a single-payer healthcare system, a nationwide single-payer healthcare system that would cover everybody. And Harry Truman proposed that because he believed it would be good for business. Harry Truman was a businessman. He was a haberdasher from Missouri. He was, he owned a hat shop. And, in fact, the Democrats, they got him in there because they liked, his kind of they were worried that FDR was going too far to the left and all this kind of stuff. And there was this backlash happening. And Truman turned out to be pretty progressive himself, which was really cool. I started to share a quote with you yesterday, and I ran into the break, and so I got cut off in the middle. So I'm going to read the entire quote. And then I want to talk about how this ties into what's going on with regard to healthcare in the United States right now, and where we're going in this country with regard to single-payer healthcare and things like that. Harry Truman said, "Republicans approve of the American farmer, but they're willing to help him go broke. They stand foursquare for the American home, but not for housing. They are strong for labor, but they are stronger for restricting labor's rights. They favor the minimum wage. The smaller the minimum wage, the better. They endorse educational opportunity for all, but they won't spend money for teachers or for schools. They think modern medical care and hospitals are fine for people who can afford them. They consider electrical power a great blessing, but only when the private power companies get their rake off. They think American standard of living is a fine thing, so long as it doesn't spread to all the people. And they admire the government of the United States so much that they would like to buy it." And that's, Harry Truman, and it's just so true today. And what's mind-boggling is, he said that in the 1940s, and here, saying that Republicans don't like schools, they don't like funding schools, they don't like, health care, medical care, they want to be sure that power is private. He just nailed it. And they're still doing the same things and still singing the same songs. And, and then they get a bunch of folks in typically in rural areas in small-town America, places that are largely or entirely white, and get them all cranked up about illegal immigration and brown people are flooding the country, and oh my God, it's MS-13, and those gay people are going to come after you, and, et cetera, et cetera. They figure out, they otherize as many of us as possible, and so that they essentially view themselves now as the other. The gun-toting, NASCAR-loving, Fox News-watching, white family. This is it. And this is, what the Republican base is down to. But these are the very people who are being harmed by Donald Trump's policies. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, he's eviscerating, he's chopping it up, tearing it apart. And it has helped us, and mostly low-income people, recover over $15 billion that was stolen from them by banks. Of course, the banksters are big funders of the Republican Party, which is why Mick Mulvaney and now this new person is coming into the CFPB, are doing this stuff. But, the story I think that is worth reminding you of is a story that I did on this program back in 2014. And it lasted for a couple of weeks. And, had we been Republicans, everybody would still remember Charlene Dill's name. But because the Democrats tend to go from issue to issue to issue rather than grabbing a couple of really big things and just pounding on them forever like the Republicans do, like, Benghazi or whatever, Charlene Dill has been forgotten, and I think that that's a great tragedy. Charlene Dill was a 32-year-old mother with 3 kids, ages 3, 7, and 9. A boy and 2 girls. And in fact, her son looks so much like my son that I saw the picture of them yesterday, and I had to call Louise over and say, hey, take a look at this. She made her living. She lived in a trailer near Kissimmee, Florida, near Orlando, Florida. She made her living cleaning people's houses and babysitting. And she finally got a third job selling vacuum cleaners for the Rainbow Vacuum Cleaner Company. And she had a heart condition. And she had 2 medications to take for the heart condition that she couldn't afford. So when President Obama passed Obamacare, Charlene presumably was excited. Hey, I can get my medications paid for. And then the Supreme Court took up the case, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, NFIB v. Sebelius versus the Secretary of HEW. And the Supreme Court took up the case and said, you know, if Florida doesn't want to expand Medicaid to all of its people, no big deal. Now, Charlene was making between $9,000 and $11,000 a year. In Florida, if you make under $12,000 a year, you're not eligible for Obamacare. And if you make over $4,000 a year, you're not eligible for Medicaid, the health insurance for the truly poor. So Charlene fell right in the middle of that slot. She's made more than $4,000 and less than $12,000 a year. And as a consequence, she was not eligible for Medicaid expansion because Rick Scott, the Republican governor of Florida, said, we are not going to take that $51 billion that the federal government is offering us, which will stimulate our state and save our citizens. We're not going to take it because, you know, the Koch brothers don't want us to, and we really love all the money they give us and all the support they give us, you know, fundamentally. And I mean, nobody actually came out and said that, but it sure looks like that's what's going on. This is, you know, you've got Republican governors all across the United States, with 2 or 3 exceptions, who have taken steps to actually harm their own citizens in order to suck up to libertarian billionaires. So Charlene Dill was cutting her pills in half or whatever she was doing. She was not taking her medications the way that she was supposed to. And she had worked a long and exhausting day, which is not good for people who have heart conditions. And she had been babysitting in the morning. She'd been cleaning houses all afternoon. And then she had 2 leads for people who might want to buy vacuum cleaners out in Kissimmee. Nice upper middle class families who, you know, and so she drove her car out to one of them and was making a sales pitch in their living room as she dropped dead. 3 children now, orphans. Essentially, she was in the process of divorcing her husband at the time. Except that she couldn't afford the divorce, so she was in, you know, she had moved out and all this kind of stuff. Charlene Dill, dead because of Rick Scott, dead because of the Supreme Court, dead because of the challenge that was launched to the Supreme Court by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which claims to be an organization that represents small business. But if you go over to SourceWatch, they take a lot of money from the Koch brothers groups and people affiliated with the Koch brothers. So once again, you've got, you know, eccentric libertarian billionaires' fingerprints all over this thing, and it's happening all over the country. This is just a screaming tragedy. And then on top of that, you look at this, you know, Fox and Friends yesterday said, you know, it's going to cost $32 trillion to do Bernie care, Medicare-for-all. Do you think it's worth it? Without pointing out, by the way, that if you don't do Bernie care, it's going to cost you 34, 35, maybe $40 trillion. But the majority of Fox and Friends viewers, apparently, I mean, it's an online poll, so they're probably going to be claiming, oh yeah, that was, you know, those were trolls who voted all over and over again in our poll. But I think they're pretty good at keeping that from happening. But the majority of people voted in the poll to say, yeah, we want Bernie care. We want single-payer health care. Pretty straightforward stuff. Meanwhile, in another story in the news, the cities of, apropos of this, the cities of Baltimore, Cincinnati, Chicago, and Columbus, Ohio, today filed a new lawsuit against Trump, saying that his cutting away at the Affordable Care Act, specifically by expanding these placebo policies, these short-term, right now you can only sell them for 90 days, and they don't cover pre-existing conditions, and they don't cover maternity, they don't cover pregnancy, things like that, so they're pretty useless health insurance. You get sick, you lose your insurance, basically, or at least according to the American Cancer Society. That he's expanding from 90 days, the period of time that health insurance companies can sell these cheapo policies, to 3 years, which is going to siphon young, healthy people away from Medicare and leave Medicare, you know, with the vulnerable and the sick. What they're alleging is that the president has, quote, waged a relentless effort to use executive action alone to undermine and ultimately eliminate the Affordable Care Act. And it sure looks like that's true. And this is a real tragedy for America and for all Americans.